seems like you're also seeing things in the press about AI and BDD. And maybe walk through the journey to where maybe you're looking at BDD with some fresh eyes, given what AI assisted development is bringing about, good and bad.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm kind of with you that I don't know exactly why BDD has become so popular in the last few months. It definitely is something that wasn't offered before. And the way that it's being presented is a non-technical solution to how do we get better at building the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
which from what I'm hearing from our clients is we want to get a shared understanding of the system. We want to build the team's capability to work together and understand, is this system doing what we expect it to do for these cases that we've documented?
That's
And
great.
that's definitely what we cover in the BDD class. And in fact, in the traditional BDD scenario of discovery, formulation, and automation, the course that we offer out of the box doesn't cover the automation aspect, which is what most people think of when they think of BDD, the actual executable given when then in Cucumber, in
Yep.
Gherkin.
Yep.
And yes, I do touch it on our Rocket 9 version of the class, but it's an add-on to the core functionality of how do we describe the system? How do we explore this problem space? And why are we doing this? Well, we're trying to do it before we write any code.
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple of things I want to highlight in what you're saying. One is I agree. I was one of those people too, always saying, hey, if you're going to look at BDD, definitely look at Cucumber and Gherkin. I love the idea of essentially compilable requirements, right? We know. But that point about, so one, you mentioned something that's interesting is BDD just as another side benefit means the business solution we're trying to deliver, anyone on the team could pick that up and read it. It
Yeah.
is very readable, and it's very clear, I think, also as well. But also this idea of the need for us to validate what the AI generated code is giving us. And to the point I think we've talked about before is it might compile, but that's not the same as saying it's delivering what we expect the features. And for you, the solution really you're saying is like, then that's where BDD comes in.
It's an aspect of it. We can describe the system at a high level of what we expect it to do, but that still doesn't get under the hood and tell us what's really going on in all of the paths that are potentially being generated there.
Yeah.
So that's that area that we're still thinking of. How do we cover that gap, which gets back to some of the software craft that we cover in the CST? How do we measure the quality of the system? How do we make sure that it's not doing things that we don't want it to do? And how do we assess the health of that code base that we've now inherited that we've got to maintain?
Yeah. I saw that the latest report from Google, the DORA report. He said there's a plethora of tools out there in terms of what you're referring to. It sounds like, and I didn't get into it much more than that, this should not be a problem that we would be able to leverage technology out there to know the health of our system if the team knew about the tools and how to use them. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that has been a problem that's been around for decades.
that's what I was thinking, right? Yeah.
We as developers are so overwhelmed with the domain that we're trying to implement, the problem we're trying to solve, and the language and frameworks that we're working with. We don't necessarily have time to go and explore all of the ancillary things that could be helping us out there.
Yeah, that statement right there needs to be like copied from you and given to every dev manager because it's true. It's that classic thing. We don't have time to do it right, but we have time to do it again, right? I was always struck by the amount of rework, and I saw that rework became part of the new DORA metrics, but the amount of rework that came in from bugs in the field, 30%, 40%, even 60% going like maintenance, that is massively costly and really efficient to come back to it again versus have done it right. So some of the things you're on the CSD class are going to help shrink that to one. That's the comment on this. What are ways, just in a practical sense, what are ways teams might be able to say, like, I hear you, Paul, 100% we are always overloaded. There's never enough time. Are there ways that what you taught in the CSD class that they can kind of cut in just in the way they're working day in, day out that kind of builds in some of these good practices to help reduce, for the sake of the business, reduce that rework cost?
Well, it goes back to what we started talking about first is that BDD helps us figure out what's in scope and what it means for it to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And then with the CSD practices and test-driven development, what is the least amount of code that I could generate that's going to satisfy that requirement? What is going to implement this behavior without me over-engineering and, generating a lot of code because I happen to be there?
Yeah.
I think that's a strength of the test-driven development approach is that I've got to be very specific about what it does and everything else it doesn't do.
Yes. So let's just flip that switch that everyone seems to be flipping about AI assisted code. Because it's like, Oh, I just went in the Claude code and it did 100,000 lines of code. I said, well, you obviously didn't do that using test-driven development step by step, right? Write it red and refactor it to green. So what the concern I've heard you voice before is you might generate a lot of this code, but understanding it is going to be a problem, especially for the younger people that are newer to the company or just joined or whatever. The shared knowledge, if that's a problem, or even to your point, is it performing correctly, beginning with just good design and TDD as well as BD. So can you comment on that? If I'm a person's like, my boss is saying I could have already generated a week's worth of code by just going to Claude Code and giving the right prompt in an hour. You could say, well, yes, you might generate code, but, and then comment on those technical practices in the CSD class would maybe help address those concerns.
Yeah, I think it's going to require us to be able to like zoom in, zoom out using different tools. The code that's being generated is source code. So you can get down to the character by character, method by method level, but that's not going to give you the overall picture. So we've got to be better at leaning on our IDEs, leaning on the automated diagrams that can be generated to then give us a viewpoint of what does the architecture look like? What do the interactions look like? As much as it pains me to say it, there's a lot in UML that we could probably be dredging back up that I haven't talked about in decades. But like, sequence diagrams.
I love sequence diagrams.
Yeah. When I do this, it does that, and returns something back. Just being able to think in that term and not having to trace through method call by method call.
Yes. By the way, I never understood things as well as when I built the sequence diagram for the system. And every time by then, like, it wasn't actually what I thought. And now that I've diagrammed, I now know for sure it was what I thought. Keeping the documentation updated was a different issue. You made a great metaphor early on that I want to come back to, and you could walk it through for people that are listening. You'd said that for developers and engineers today, it might help if they see the mindset that's shifting from being a home builder to a home inspector. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think some of it comes back to that when we are asking an AI system to build something for us, we're getting the structure and we hope that we can occupy it. But I would want to have somebody go through and inspect it, which when you're doing a home transaction, you hire an independent third party to come in and say, oh, I went up in the attic, I went down in the crawl space, noticed these things, try to ask for some money, knocked off the sale price, or don't even bother buying this one. And I think we're going to have that come up for us as software developers. Here's this code base. Can you do that same kind of inspection and give a report back on it?
So for me and the people that are listening, I think this is really important to be mindful, whether you're a developer and you're relatively new, if you've been around for a while and you're kind of reflecting on this. Certainly all the folks I work with on the management side for engineering, this is a different skill set. It's like a muscle they haven't had to maybe work out a lot, right?
Yeah.
So some of that guidance.
And I feel that the home inspectors that I've encountered in my life were former builders, were people that knew how to build something. And as you were mentioning, we may be cutting out that next generation of builders because we're now jumping to here's the structure, what do you think?
I think that there's all these good metrics we could look at to make sure we're getting what we expect. And again, I would agree with what you're saying that we don't ever seem to have time to actually measure the right metrics, whether that's DORA or outcomes on the value of what we built and all that. So that could be coming back around to, I don't understand everything that's happening with my car, but thank goodness the gauge has enough instrumentation I can be watching that. And I just need to know it's out of control or out of compliance with what we expect or want. So maybe for those people like, yeah, I see Paul's point about home inspector. What are those things that they would be checking? Now, some of these things you and I were mentioning before, and you can reference a few, but give us a starting point of saying, like, hey, at least bottom line, you might want to be looking, considering checking these things, using these type of tools, because the code's going to be built faster than you can just stay up, just you reading lines of code to know what it's doing, right?
What's funny that you bring up the gauges is that as a developer, we don't have a gauge that's got like 10 different icons on it. We've got 5 different gauges that have 50 different icons on it. And I think we're going to have to start boiling those down to the essentials. And I really haven't seen a lot of talk about that in the AI space. How do we take this body of code and just give us a general sense of you need to go to the mechanic or it's okay to drive?
So there's one I found interesting, and I know you're a fan of the guys on Mob Mentality. So when Chris Lucian and Austin Chadwick were talking about it, saying, look, that's fine, it generated this, but by the time I took the additional time to actually fix the things or clean it up, did I really get those gains? And I saw somewhere else, they said, yeah, you might be getting a 30% or even 40% gain with AI-assisted code being generated. But the time you do what Austin was talking about to clean that up, you're maybe down to just 10 or 20%. So
Mhm.
maybe some of these are people watching the amount of like where they use their time. And I think in general devs don't. They just kind of say, I was coding. Well, that might look different now. Like I was reviewing code that might become a significant part of their week and a skill set that gets developed as one number or a metric they'd be watching.
I would wonder, are they taking that as an opportunity to, do their own feedback loop of what did I say that caused me to go back and have to do that rework?
Yes.
And getting back to the BDD, was my specification not good enough? And what can I do to make that better for my next effort?
As a small note, for those who listen, depending on everyone's experience level, these large language models that are doing what seems to be miraculous, and people say how smart they are still predictive engines. You can look at some of the earlier videos and the clips from Paul talking about some of this, but they're just algorithmic predicting. They're looking at all the words that get used. My point is, if you're using certain words that get used in multiple ways, in the South, they say my neck of the woods. LLM's not going to necessarily always know what neck of the woods looks like, but it's that thing like the words matter. To your point, Paul, being aware of what did I feed it and how clear and structured was that. Otherwise, you're almost introducing this randomization. And certainly if you
Uh-huh.
go to different models, and yeah, now your results become unpredictable. Couple that with a difficulty to actually easily read and know what it's doing is right. And you could quickly generate a bigger mess than you actually can get your hands around to know confidently if the system's
Yeah.
performing better.
I think there's, you brought up neck of the woods. There's a self awareness that neck of the woods is an idiom that may make sense to a certain audience. But there are things for sure that we say that we 100% believe, but may not have any relevance outside of the context that we learned it in. That's just another meta level that we've now got to be aware of, isolated from all the code that we're generating.
I always thought it was humorous when I was studying other languages, like how do they say like it's raining cats and dogs, and then that day it's raining strings, which is funny. You mentioned an aspect also this might impact just teams and reteaming. What are your thoughts on why that might be?
We were talking about Heidi Helfand had a book called Dynamic Reteaming come out a few years back. Some of the notion of the original Agile coaches was that you wanted to get a high functioning team, get them together, and bring problems to them,
Mhm.
not change the composition of that team because every time somebody comes or goes, you've got to learn how to work together. But
Mhm.
we're way past that, solid composition team landscape. And now we've got to get better at working together and working with something that isn't one of us.
Yes.
How do we interact with this AI stuff, bring in it as part of the team, and how do I collaborate with it?
Mhm.
Knowing that day by day, release by release, that may be a different personality that I've now got to deal with. So when you're talking about working with Claude or something else, it's like, well, which Claude were you working with?
Yeah.
It's not
True.
a Claude out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Because even when I'm in gym, I was getting something I didn't expect, and I was like, "Oh, I did not switch it to the deep research mode. No wonder I'm not getting what I thought." So even within the same platform, multiple models, and then ask it a few months later after a new release, and who knows? So I am seeing when we're talking to the companies that standardization recommendation. One, the like, we got to put a box somehow, or what's the limit of what's out there? There's literally thousands of AI tools now uh,
Mhm.
and I'm never one to actually say, limit the team, but I think just for the sake of could a team get their arms around it and how they work together, what tools they use, they probably need to fence that at some level, at least for X number of months until they stabilize. Like we know the landscape for these tool sets and this environment and ecosystem, because it seems very much a massive open box of what AI tooling and functionality is out there for a team to put their arms around.
Mhm. Yeah.
The other thing about the CSD and the ACSD people, how do we become a good, healthy, thriving team? And how do I be a great team member? Some of this must come back into play and be revisited on those practices that help someone be both a good team member and also help develop a team. How might that look with AI as a person out there and some of those practices that you talk about in the CSD class that might be revisited as helpful as teams go through this adjustment?
Another phrase that I use when I'm thinking about the CSD series is how confident am I in the solution that I'm delivering? We, in the pre AI days, it's like, how confident am I in the code that I generated? But now it's like, how confident am I in the spec that I'm coming up with or the code that was given to me? We've had tools like characterization tests, acceptance criteria, definition of done
Mm-hmm.
all along the way, but we've got to be confident in the use of those things, that we're not just getting a system that compiles, looks okay. No, it's we've got to start leaning back on our testing skills. How do I take this thing and approach it as a black box?
Yeah.
Because it's no longer going to be the case that I wrote this code. No, that doesn't surprise me. It did something as a side effect, it's like, oh, I need to try and test this out, work through the happy path, work through some of the negative paths, think about it in terms of this is something that I want to stand behind, but how do I do that if I don't know what's going on under the hood?
Yeah. And that capability and the speed, it feels like there's this pressure in the IT world, in the engineering world about,
Yeah.
hey, everyone's expecting AI is going to do these 8x, 10x deliverables. I'm sure you heard this. It's just taking too much time to get going with TDD. It's taking too much time to try out with BDD and automate it with Gherkin and Qt. I hear you. It does going to take time. So some of this, I imagine for the way you're looking at, like they're going to have to kind of shunt in some space to build these skills and revisit them. Otherwise, I'm wondering how would they ever stay up to really understand what the system's doing now that's moving 10x faster.
Well, the thing with TDD though is that it may take a little bit more time up front to get there, but once you're done, you're done. You don't have that bug report. You don't have that code and fix cycle. You're just done and you move on to the next feature that you want to deliver. And you were talking about the pressure to deliver. I mean, that's been going back since I entered the workforce. It just happens that now we can turn around what we deliver quicker, but that doesn't give us a guarantee that it's doing what we expect it to do.
And I know there's the lean engineering, so I'll make a quick reference to that for those who don't know. A great lean principle was like there's always a bottleneck, right? So if we lower the
Yeah.
lake, there's always going to be some rock that's sticking up. So we might have lowered the lake in terms of just code generation, but there's going to be another bottleneck here. And your point's like, well, the bottleneck
Yeah.
can be verification, the system's behaving the way we want. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And pre-AI, it was always the bottleneck was not how much code can we deliver, but it's how much code can we test, verify, and deploy.
Yes. If anyone's from QA, you have my heart and compassion, because QA always felt like it got left hand in the bag. Like we need this tomorrow. Like they just got it that day, especially if it's all manual. So back to TDD, I love what you're saying. You write it once and it's going to be good. The confidence of a team, and especially to your point about the reteaming, people sharing knowledge, as well as like, knowledge may be coming in faster. That confidence in the system versus my own knowledge, I know this area, the code really well or something, but what if I'm out that day? What if there's a bug in that area of the system and no one's around that has worked on that? That was always what I loved about that safety net, really collective ownership from XP, that those practices give you, not that someone just knows all the systems. So that speed and the reteaming might come to play again on that one as well. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, and definitely the notion of having a set of automated tests that confirm the behavior of the system, I still don't think is as widely adopted as we would want it to be. And I think it is going to be crucial going forward. If you've got code that's being generated, how do you know it's doing what you want?
The other thing I feel like it moves forward a little bit that I was mentioning was back in the day, I would tell these teams that were starting off in my PO class, I'd say, like, get ready. Because if your teams do what I've seen them do a number of times at different companies, they're going to be moving so fast with this empowerment and team decision-making and all that. If you're barely staying up on having requirements ready for them in the past, you're going to be overwhelmed. It feels like we can be that point again, even on the product side, that if the teams are generating it and they get the skills you're talking about, where they can confidently say, yes, it generated, and we have these ways of making sure it is doing the right thing and it moves out and ready for production, that ability for product to stay up on top with good ideas and validate ideas and clarity on requirements, or a way to collaborate with the team in very short pieces of it that they're comfortable working. I do think it flattens out the decision-making process and the feedback loops and how just the amount of effort involved. That whole SDLC feels like it's going to be shrinking. So when people say it's engineering, I'm like, it's not just engineering. It's the whole value stream of everyone involved in that chain trying to get something out the door and how they work together.
I think it really does take the promise of Agile of shortening that feedback loop to, not the 2 weeks that we've all defaulted to, but the one feature that we want next.
Yeah. Like single piece flow, like getting back to like, swarm on that. In terms of some of those practices like pairing or mobbing, do you see how that might look differently now with AI involved? People talk about AI as your pair programmer. I still think there's a value in learning whether that's pairing with humans or mobbing, because there's just so much knowledge to try to take in. Have you seen some kind of a shift or a difference how you see it now compared to before AI with those practices?
I mean, there's definitely a distinction between working with a computer versus working with a peer or even a junior senior person. There's a different relationship there. But I think that ability to kind of not be in your head, but have that conversation is something that's going to be valuable. And we've seen it with the pairing and mobbing. And now we're starting to see it more with the AI partner.
Yeah, that's one I want to try, because I think Chris has mentioned like he has fun by kind of giving the AI personality, which makes it more engaging for him to be having that exchange. Now, clearly AI can have some kind of expertise, quote unquote, that's based on patterns. So I think there is value there that you could pair. but you still want to make it somehow work and be effective for people. And I think, yeah, classically, the devs typically work solo, and it takes effort to pull them into that. But I think this is a good chance to revisit. And they could have fun on just on their own, and no worry that Bob just had a tuna fish sandwich. He's going to sit next to me and breathe tuna fish breath on me. It's an AI, right?
Yeah.
I saw something else interesting is that AI is endlessly patient. So it doesn't get bothered or frustrated. It can keep working. And as a warning for everyone, if we've ever seen AI just in a general prompt, people have used Gemini or ChatGPT, and you answer the question and it answered like completely wrong, but comfortably, right? Like early days, you do math and it would just be wrong. Like, yep, here you go. If you already know that ChatGPT can just give you wrong answers, but very confidently, think about what's doing with the code. It's never going to say, I'm not sure about this. It's going to say, here you go. And it's a false promise to believe that the confidence of essentially a computer system is actually valid. But I think that that's a valid hook because I think everyone has experienced AI giving an answer like, what? And it was very wrong. Or even go in circles with it. Like, no, I want this. Like, here you go. And it's still not doing like, but I just told you again. So the complexity of systems and code being generated, I think multiplies that significantly, that they should be like really super cautious about, we're just putting our feet in the water. We got to make sure that we know these things.
Yeah, I think off of our last conversation, I kept going back to trust but verify. I want to believe that you're telling me something that's true and I can rely on, but how do we verify that? And that gets back to our testing techniques, our measurement techniques, our detective skills, our testing skills, whatever they are.
Yeah, I like the detective skill. That should be something that's added to the class. So let's say that I'm just like so many people out there. My boss just said, hey, we got to be using AI more. Why aren't you getting AX returns? We gave you Copilot months ago, whatever. What would you recommend to your typical team that's just saying, okay, we've got to get going with this? What might be some possible first steps for them, whether that's the training, the tooling, the mindset, attitudes? What would you suggest?
Don't go it alone. I mean, we've got all the different people in the software craft community testing this out, finding out what's working, what's not. We've already seen the evolution from trying to do a one-shot implementation versus now we start having the code like Kent Beck. Well, what does that mean? That means you can small steps, have good coupling and cohesion, have test suites that you run all the time, being very specific about it, and maybe bringing that AI person into your mob or your pair, thinking about it that way. But being very explicit about this is an experiment, I'm going to learn, but I've got to go back and think about what did I learn?
So that might be an experiment. And in my experience, when we work with so many teams introducing new practices, and I've been there both as a developer and a manager, I know everyone's got plenty to do. It's not like everyone's sitting around, wish we had stuff to do. I'm glad that Paul's suggesting these things. I do get it. So one way I found very practical to kind of put your foot in the water, your foot in the door, is within your sprints, if you're using Scrum or if you're just using Kanban, put an item in your backlog, but try to cycle through, like try at least one of these things that Paul's suggesting each sprint. I don't know what your load is. Self-organize and pick one that seems like smaller if you want to start there. But there's a commitment to these practices. You just got to put your hand to it. I know you've seen this plenty of times, Paul, certainly with TDD, it feels like it might be slower at the beginning, but then it catches up and you start to get the momentum and the wins, right?
And we're definitely in the landscape again, where if you're not getting the opportunity to learn it at your company, some other companies probably can offer that opportunity to your people. So be aware of the landscape because everybody knows this is coming and we've got to figure out how we can get experience in it.
Paul, you and I got to do the Certified Scrum Professional Developer class, which is the third after the Certified Scrum Developer, Advanced Certified Scrum Developer, then that CSPD class. But one thing I liked about that is there is a leadership aspect. So some of what Paul is saying, I do feel like I see this, I'm seeing it, I saw it again this week. Your companies are looking for getting wins with AI moving forward. We can all have opinions on it. I think those opinions are valid and worth hearing, but they are looking for people to move forward with it. And I think there's a leadership aspect when Paul's saying this thing is, stop waiting for someone to pick you. Some of this is you pick yourself and you just try these things out and cut in, you start conversations and you research some of the things that Paul's talking about and take steps because that gets noticed. And at least they feel like, well, there's action and people are moving and they can kind of crystallize it. But I think the waiting till there's time, the waiting till it's an opportunity, this is probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
Go out after hours at the meetups and groups are out there. Or to be honest, some people I know, my classic is the person like, they never give me time and my job's terrible. And they're going off all stuff. I said, how long are you working? 17 years. well, then, yeah, that's probably 16 years too long. But sincerely, lots of companies are embracing it. Lots of companies, I think, are revisiting software crafts. To Paul's point, with AI, and I think it's a real exciting time for those who genuinely care about the work you do. AI doesn't have to be a threat. It can be an interesting way to continue to learn and maybe come back to some of these first principles that I think are really valuable that maybe got overlooked in the whole Scrum and Agile
Yeah.
hoopla. Dev just kind of got skipped. And I feel like we're coming back to Dev back in the center and how we do our craft being revisited and important. So it's a good point you make. But I just want to add that about the leadership side, if you would, because I know you've got decades of experience. How does that look like for someone that's faced with the situation? We got to find new ways of working. There is pressure to try out new things. We know we have to learn while still delivering. I'm in a team. Maybe give some examples of what does leadership look like for you that you've seen when people kind of step up and it's been good results for them as an engineer or a lead or whatever that position might be.
It's not expecting 100% perfect results.
Good. Yeah.
It's allowing people to experiment, allowing people to try things out and possibly fail. We don't know what is going to be the right answer right now. We know we've got a lot of new tools in front of us. We know we've got a lot of the same old problems in front of us.
Absolutely.
How do we marry the two? And then how do we evaluate whether we're making progress or is this a dead end and we need to find out another path?
And if anyone is a manager or maybe you interact with the manager a lot, then you can help influence that. That DORA report from Google called out specifically the culture has to have space for learning. I think, Paul, we've known this for a long time. That's the case.
Yeah.
But it's a multiplier. You're going to have to cross this area of like, we've got to create space to learn and dig in. That doesn't go away just because AI is out there. So look for the practices, the communities of practice you can kind of develop, the lunch and learns, whatever just starts this idea of like, hey, we're always learning around here and whatever small ways we can. AI is not the magic wand. You will still have to slow down the speed up. It can be a massive multiplier, but as someone said, AI might simply amplify the bad that's going on how our team works or doesn't work together well or how we handle requirements. So we wouldn't want it to amplify in the negative, we want to amplify in the positive. That's going to take some learning to get those wins. Thanks for the time, Paul. For those who are listening, if you have questions, comments, post them. Feel free to put those down there. We'd love to hear what's on your mind and what you're up to. We can send out the resources as well. Paul already mentioned some of those. Obviously, the BDD class, which he said has really been popular lately, and you can see why with how that helps with AI development and verifying it's working. But the core of it, really, Certified Scrum Developer, Advanced Certified Scrum Developer, those core practices for software craft and bringing those back in are great places to start for individuals and teams as well. So take a look at that. We will be back hopefully with some more good stuff. Thanks.
All right, cool. Thanks, Scott.